The set of financial disasters were sown more than 30 years ago when three smart, ambitious men working sometimes in concert, allies in cause, they all believe in and sometimes in opposition. Competitors trying to gain advantage over each other's created, created and shiny new financial vehicle, called the mortgage-backed security. In the simplest of terms, in a lower Wall Street to scope up loans made the people who were buying homes bundle, bundle them together by the thousands, and they released the bundle in bits of pies to investor Lewis Ranieri, the messianic bond trader who ran the Salomon Brothers mortgage desk and whose role in the creation of this new product will be immortalized in the best-selling book Lear Poker was one, and Larry Fink, his arch, arch, archrival, and the first Boston, who would later go on the found BlackRock, one of the world's largest asset management manager firms, and who served as key advisor to government government during the financial crisis. Was another David Maxwell, the chief executive executive of the Federal National Mortgage Association, of a quasi-governmental corporation. Now, Fannie Mae was the dear with varying degrees of favor. They all thought they were doing something not just innovate, innovate, but important. When they testified before Congress, as they did often in Tuesdays, they straight not heaven forbid the money their firms were going to raise from mortgage-backed securities, but but rather all the ways these newfangled bonds were making the American dream of new ones homes possible. Ranieri, in particular, used to wax rhapsodically about the benefits of mortgage-backed securities for homeowners, and claiming correctly that the investor demand for the mortgage bonds that he and the others were creating was increasing the level of home of ownership in the country. These men were no saints, and they all knew, knew, knew there were fortunes of stake. But the idea that mortgage-backed securities will also lead inexorably to the rise of the subprime industry, that they will create hidden systemic risks, the likes of the which the financial world had never before seen, that they would undo the connection between borrowers and lenders in ways that were truly dangerous. That wasn't even in their frame of reference, or as Rainery told Fortune magazine um, after it was all over. I wasn't out to invent the biggest floating craps game of all time, but that's what happened. It was the late 19, 1917. The baby boom generation was dropping out. Boomers were going to want their own homes just like their parents, but given their vast number, there were 70, 76 million births between 1949 and 19, 1964. Many economists worried that that tree that there wouldn't be enough capital to fund all their mortgage. This worry was exacerbated by the fact the main provider on mortgage, the saving alone or 30 in the industry was in terrible strait. The diocese financed their loans by offering the depositor and saving accounts which paid an interest rate set by law and 5 5% just because yet because the late the 1970s was was also a time of high inflation and double digit interest rates. Customers were moving um, their money out of use and L and into new vehicles like money market funds, which pay much higher interest. The dear the dear words become the stability. Um, Ranieri would later recall the founding mechanism was broken. Besides, the mortgage maker was highly inefficient. In the certain areas of the country, at certain times, three three mi- three mics be shortage and found in the other places, and other times three mics be a surplus. Three was a mechanism for typing into in a broader pool of folks as Dick Pratt, the former chairman, the former chairman of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, once told Congress is it's the largest capital market in the world, virtually, and it's one which was sheltered capital market in the world from the normal progress of the capital markets. In theory, at last, putting capital to its most efficient use was what Wall Street did. The story, as it would later be told is that Rainieri and think success by inventing the process of securitization, a process that would become some commonplace on Wall Street that in, in time involved be uses to handle not just mortgage but auto loans, credit card loans, commercial loans, you name it. Rainier named the process security because, as he described it at the time, it was a technology that, in essence, Arnold used to convert a mortgage into a bond. That is a security thing developed a key technique called tranching, which allowed the securitizer to to curve to curve up a mortgage bond into pies tranches according to the different risks entailed. So that it could be sold in investor who had appetite for those particular risks. The cash flows from the mortgage were met out accordingly. The truth is true that the creation of mortgage-backed security was never something Wall Street did entirely on its own. As clever and driven as Fink and Raniere were, they would never have a success in the government had paved the way, changing changing laws for instance that stood in the way of this new maker. And more important, they couldn't have done it without the involvement of Fannie Mae and its sibling Freddie Mac. The Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, the complicated interplay that evolved between Wall Street and these two strange companies. Uh, a story of alliance and feuds, of dependency and resentment, gave rise to a mortgage-backed securities maker that was far more dysfunctional than anyone realized at the time, and out that dysfunction grew the beginning of the crisis of 2008, almost since the phrase "the American dream" was was coined in the early 1930s. It has been synonymous with a home ownership, home, ownership in a way that isn't true in most other countries. Home ownership is something that the vast majority of the Americans aspire to. It suggests upward mobility in opportunity, a stake in something that matters. Historically, owning a home hasn't just been about taking possession of an appreciating asset or ever having a roof over one's head. It has also been a statement about values. Not surprisingly, government policy has long encouraged home homeownership and the home mortgage interest that was seen in a classic example. So is the 30 years fixed mortgage, which in standard in only one other country, Denmark, and is a designate to allow middle class family afford monthly mortgage payment for decades. Federal law gave the S&L industry a small interest rate advantage over the banking industry. The housing differential disadvantage was called all of the police had unwavering bipartisan support, and criticizing them was political heresy. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were also important agents of government homeownership policies. They too were insulated from criticism. Fannie Mae, an older of the two, was born during the Great Depression. Its original role was the buy of mortgage that the Veterans Administration and the Federal Housing Administration were guaranteeing those free up capital allowed for more government-insured loans to be made. In 1968, Fannie was split into two companies. One nicknamed Ginnie Mae continued buying of government-insured loans and remained firmly a part of the government. Fannie, however, was allowed to several new things. It was allowed to buy conventional mortgage, ones that had not been insured by the government, and it was allowed to insure securities backed by mortgage it had warranted. In the process, Fannie became a very odd creature, half government enterprise. It had a vaguely defined mandate, social mandate from Congress to make housing more able to low and middle income Americans. Half private enterprise in shareholders and board of directors, and the structure of typical corporation. At about the same time, Congress created Freddie Mac to buy up mortgage from the dirty industry and the thrift industry. Again, the idea was that this purchase would free up capital, allowing the S&L to make more mortgage until until 1989, when Freddie Mac joined Fannie Mae as publicist trade company. Freddie was actually owned by the third industry and was overseen by the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, which regulated the S&Ls. People in Washington called Fannie and Freddie the GSS, GSA, which GSA stood for Government Sponsored Enterprise. Here's a surprising fact: it was the government, not Wall Street, that first secured modern mortgage. Ginnie Mae came first selling securities beginning in 1917 that consisted of FHA and, loans and guaranteeing the payment of principal and interest. A year later, Freddie Mac issued the first mortgage-backed security using conventional mortgage, also principal and interest guaranteed. It in doing so it was taking of the risk that the borrower make the fall, while transferring the interest rate risk from the S and Ls to dirty pair inverters. And Freddie was using Wall Street to make its securities. Volume, volume, volume grew slowly. It was not a huge success. Took a dirty years fix. Mortgage may seem simple to a borrower. Mortgage confused of complex risks for investor. Dirty 30 years after all is a long time in the space of 3 decades. Not only is it likely that interest rates will change, but who knows? The borrowers may fall in hard times and default. In addition, mortgage come with something called prepayment risks, because borrowers have the right to prepay their mortgage. Investor can't be sure that the cash flow from the mortgage will stay at the level they were expecting. The prepayment risk diminishes the value of the bond. Genius and Freddie's securities removes the default risk, but did nothing about any of these other risks. They they simply uh, distribute the cash flows from the pool of the mortgage on a pro rata basis. Whatever happened after that, well, there was the investor problem. When Wall Street got into the act, it focused focus on devising focus as securities that will appeal to to much a broader group of investors and create far more demand than a gene of Freddie Home bond. Part of the artwork came from trenching, carving of the bond according to different screens of risk. Investors found the appealing because different tranches could be used to meet the particular needs of different investors. For instance, you could create what came to be known as stripper securities. One strip pays only interest, another only principal. If interest rates declined and everyone refinanced, the interest-only strip could be worthless, worthless. But if rate rose, investor world makes a nice profit. Sure enough, parceling out risks in this fashion gave mortgage-backed and securities an enormous, uh, able to wide variety of the investor from a stating start in late 1917. Bonds grew from the mortgage and single family home groups the more than three 315 350 billions by 1981, according to a report by the Securities and Exchange Commission. By the end of 2001, that number had risen to um, 3.3 trillion. Tranching was also good for Wall Street because the firms underwriting the mortgage-backed funds could sell the various pieces for more money than the sum of the whole, and bankers could extract rich fees. Plus, of course, plus, of course, Wall Street could make money from trading the new securities. By 1983, according Business Week, Rainery Mortgage Financial Group and Salomon Brothers accounted for closely half Salomon's um, 415 millions in profits, along with Young's bonds, mortgage-backed uh, bonds become a defining feature of the 1980 financial makers. Trenching, however, was not the only necessary ingredient. A second important factor was the involvement of the credit rating agencies. Moody's, Standard of Poor's, and later Fitch Rating. Ranieri pushes hard to get rating agencies involved because he realized the investors were never going to comfortable with or to be long willing to work hard enough to understand the intricacies of the hundreds of or thousands of mortgages inside each security. People didn't even know what the average length of mortgage was. Ranieri would later recall, you need the impose structure that were relatively, relatively relatively simple from investor to understand, so that they didn't have to become mortgage experts. Investor understood what a rating meant, and the Congress and regulators places such trust in the rating agencies that they had designated them a nationality recognized statistical rating organization, or NRSROs, among other things. And the law allowed investors who weren't supposed to taking much risk, like pension funds, to invest in certain securities if they had a high enough rating. Up, up until then, the rating agencies had built their business entirely around corporate about corporate bonds, rating them on the scale from triple A, the safes of the safe, to triple V, and the bottom rung of what was so-called investment grade, and on all the way the default at first, and they resist and reading these new bonds, but they eventually come around as they realized that rating mortgage-backed securities could be a good secondary business, especially at the volume growth. Very quickly, um, very, I don't know, quickly they became an integral part of the process, and so called structured financial became a key source of protips from the rating agencies, and the dear thing Ranieri and think needed in order to make mortgage-backed securities appealing to investors. They need Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at around the same the same time. Ranieri and Fink were trying to figure out how to make mortgage-backed security work. Fannie Mae was going broke. It was losing $1 million a day and rushing toward toward a collapse that could have been one of the most disastrous in the modern history. As the Washington Post later put it, as interest rates skyrocketed, Fannie found itself in the same kind of dire trouble as many of the dear thrifts, thrifts, and the same reason. Unlike Freddie Mac, which had of letters in its interest, its interest rate risk into inverter. Fannie Mae had kept the 30 years fixed rate mortgage it it bought in on its books. No, it was choking on those mortgage things got so bad that it months to go. Charles measured how long it could survive. Interest rate didn't decline. It had even devised a plan to call on the Federal Reserve to save in it if banks stopped lending it money. Two things saved Fannie Mae. First, the banks never did stop lending it money. Why? Because their working assumption was the Fannie Mae status a government sponsored enterprise with a central role in making dirty years montage possible for middle class American meant meant that the federal government would always be, be there to buy it out if it ever got into serious trouble. Although there was nothing in the statute priva- privatizing privatizing Fannie Mae that stated this explicitly, and Fannie's excuses would spend decades coldly and denying that they have a spoken government safety net that whatever it believe over time Fannie Mae explicit government guarantee. As it came to be called, became a critical source of its power and success. That second thing that saved Fannie Mae was to arrive in 1981 of David Maxwell in a new chief executive. Maxwell in a predecessor, former California Republican congressman named Alon Oakley Hunter was not particularly astute about business, and not nor were the people around him during the Carter administration, when he should have been focusing focusing on the effect rising interest rates on Fannie portfolio. He had instead spent his time feuding with Patricia Harris, Carter's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Like Hunter, Maxwell had once been a Republican, a Philadelphia native. He graduated from Yale, where he was a champion tennis player, and then Harvard, where he studied law before joining the nation administration as general counsel of HOD. When he was approached to run Fannie, he has living in California running a mortgage insurance company called Ticker Mortgage. And he converted to the Democratic Party because he felt that in California that was only way they have any influence. I was a businessman. Maxwell said no. A businessman was exactly what Fannie Mae needed. Jim Johnson, the Democratic power broker who succeeded Maxwell and Fannie CAO in the 1999, um, would later say that they established the company as a long-term force in housing financing. Jody Kennedy, Jody Kennedy, an affordable housing advocate who worked at Freddie Mac as lobbyist in the late 1980s. 18. Put in more grandly, she called Maxwell a transformative figure. Maxwell was gracious and charming, the sort of man who sent handwritten notes and opened his office door to all his employees and took boxes of books with him to read on vacation. But he was also incredible, tall, with blue eyes, and that couldn't turn in the meshes. Max immediately began running Fanny in more businesslike fashion. Tightened the standard for the mortgage for the, he tightened the standard for the loans that Fanny bought. He put a new management system under Hunter. Fanny uses to buy mortgage as much as a year in advance. That means that later had time to see where interest rates were going, and then shove up only unprofitable loans and Fannie Maxwell changed that too.